You ever have a moment that divides your life into a before and after? For me, it was a Saturday afternoon in early May, the day my son Jonathan got married. A day I thought would be filled with pride, laughter, maybe a few tears of joy. Instead, it became the day I realized I'd raised a stranger. I'm Loretta, 62, mother of one, and a woman who's been through enough to know when something is cracked beyond repair. Jonathan was my whole world. I had him when I was barely 23. His father, Jerome, left when the baby still smelled like powdered formula and hope. Said he wasn't built for the long haul. I held our son in one arm and a stack of unpaid bills in the other and made a vow. I'd give that boy everything I never had. And I did. Lord, I did. Worked doubles at the hospital laundry, scrubbed floors at the courthouse on weekends. We shared a one-bedroom apartment with secondhand furniture and a leaky faucet that sang us to sleep. I skipped meals so he could have lunch money. Sewed patches on his jeans when they tore. Read him books until I was hoarse. He got good grades, kept his nose clean, made me proud every step of the way. When he got that scholarship to Emory, I cried in the car for 20 straight minutes, clutching the acceptance letter like it was made of gold. And when he wanted to go to law school, I handed him an envelope stuffed with money, saved dollar by dollar, over years of folding sheets and disinfecting toilets. He didn't know I skipped dental appointments to save it. So when he told me he was getting married to a girl named Marissa, I smiled. She was polished, manicured fingers, a voice that sounded like it had been trained to charm. From a family that used summer as a verb. But she was Jonathan's choice, so I welcomed her the way I was raised to do, open arms, open heart. They asked if I'd help with the wedding expenses. I didn't hesitate. Took out part of my retirement, sold off my coin collection, the one Jerome's father had left me. It's his day, I told myself. Let him shine. I paid for the flowers, white roses flown in from a florist in California. I paid for the band, the linens, the custom wedding arch she saw on Instagram. Even her dress, a strapless cloud of lace and shimmer that cost more than my first car. I never asked for anything in return. Not a thank you, not a special mention. Just a seat at the ceremony, just to be seen. Instead, I was seated by the kitchen. Literally. When I arrived at the venue, a historic plantation-style house with wraparound porches and white rocking chairs, I was handed a laminated badge that read vendor. I blinked at it. There must be a mistake, I said to the young woman at the check-in table, her headset blinking like a Christmas light. She smiled that tight, rehearsed smile. You're on the list for staff seating. Staff. I followed her directions to a folding chair behind the swinging doors that led to the main dining hall. The smell of shrimp cocktail hung thick in the air. I sat between two catering carts and a tray of dirty glasses. My dress, lavender chiffon, hand-picked and steamed just that morning, brushed against the floor, collecting stains I wouldn't notice until later. I sat quietly, listening to the clink of silverware and champagne flutes just beyond the door. They never came to get me. Not Jonathan. Not even Marissa. I peeked through the crack of the swinging doors and caught a glimpse of the dance floor, golden lights spilling over everything. Her mother, hair done up like royalty, gave a speech about how they'd welcomed Jonathan into their hearts like a son. Her father, a real estate guy with cufflinks that sparkled like judgment, gave a toast. Jonathan thanked them, called them a blessing, said he was grateful for all they'd done to make the day happen. I clutched the little handbag he bought me for Mother's Day back in 2015, before he got too busy to call. The catering manager, a boy barely out of high school, muttered an apology. Bride didn't want any clashes with the aesthetic, he said. Something about the photos. He winced, like he knew how it sounded. I didn't say a word. Just sat there, watching them twirl under fairy lights and white bunting, the kind you only see in magazines. Watched my son smile at another woman's mother like she'd raised him herself. I should have cried, but I didn't. I waited until the cake had been cut, and the music turned to static in my ears. Then I slipped out, walked the 3 blocks to where my car was parked. Guests had valet, but not me. I drove home with my hands at 10 and 2, not trusting myself to grip the wheel any other way. When I got home, I took off the dress, hung it carefully, and made a cup of sweet tea. sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once taught Jonathan his multiplication tables, and stared at the deed to my house. That house, the one he'd once said he hoped to inherit, the one I'd planned to leave him in my will. But that night, I realized something. Sacrifice only means something if it's honored, and mine had been erased. So I called my lawyer the next morning. The morning after the wedding, I woke before the sun, the scent of grease and regret still tangled in my hair. I couldn't shake the sound of clinking champagne flutes, of laughter echoing from behind those swinging kitchen doors. The ache in my chest had hardened overnight. Not grief, not exactly. Something else, something sturdier. I made myself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, just the way Jerome used to drink it. Sat in the chair by the window, my knees tucked to my chest like I was trying to make myself small. But I was done being small. The house was quiet, too quiet. All those years I dreamed of filling it with voices. Grandbabies playing on the floor. Jonathan bringing his family home for Sunday dinner. But he hadn't visited in over a year. Said Marissa had allergies. Said Decatur was too far out of the way. I pulled the deed out of the manila envelope I kept in the file drawer under the old Dell desktop that hadn't worked since Obama's first term. I ran my fingers over the raised seal. My name sat there, bold and proud. Loretta Mae King. Sole owner. Jonathan didn't know. Not really. He assumed. He'd said so once in passing. When you're gone, I'll probably sell this place. Marissa's more into modern builds. I laughed back then. I'm not laughing now. I called Mr. Humphrey, our old family lawyer. He'd handled Jerome's will and the dispute over my mother's burial plot. He picked up on the second ring, his voice scratchy with age and cigarette smoke. Loretta, he said, surprise stretching out the vowels. Everything all right? Not really, I said. I need to talk to you about the house. He didn't ask questions, just said, come by at 11. I got dressed slowly. Pressed slacks, white blouse. I even pinned on the gold brooch I'd inherited from Aunt Lillian, the one shaped like a peacock. I walked into that law office with my spine straight and my chin high. Mr. Humphrey blinked when he saw me. You look like a woman with a plan, he said. I am, I replied. I slid the deed across his desk. I want to transfer ownership, I said, calm and steady. But not to my son. To a trust. A charitable one. I want this house sold after I pass, and the money to go towards scholarships for single mothers going back to school. His eyebrows shot up. You sure about that? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He nodded slowly, the wheels already turning. We can set that up. Ironclad. No contest. And just like that, it was done. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just exhaled for the first time in a decade. That afternoon, I called Jonathan. He picked up on the fourth ring. I could hear Marissa giggling in the background. Hey, Ma, he said, distracted. Everything okay? Just peachy, I said. I just wanted to let you know I'm making some changes. To the house. A pause. What kind of changes? I'll send you the paperwork when it's finalized, I said sweetly. No need to worry about modern builds anymore. He hesitated. What are you talking about? You'll see, I said. Congratulations again on the wedding. Then I hung up. That night, I slept like a baby. No dreams, no tears, just the soft, steady hum of peace. It didn't take long. 3 days after I called Jonathan, my phone rang just as I was pulling a cobbler out of the oven. Blueberry, his childhood favorite. Not that he'd know that anymore. The screen flashed his name, and I let it ring once, twice. I almost didn't pick up. But something in me wanted to hear what his voice would sound like, now that the money he never asked about was no longer his to assume. Hey, Ma, he said, voice tight. Polite. Practiced. Hi, baby, I said, sweet as tea left too long in the sun. I got your message. He paused. About the house. I waited. I guess I just didn't realize you were planning something like that. Neither did I said. Until Saturday. Silence. I could hear him breathing, could practically hear the gears turning in his lawyer-trained brain, spinning scenarios and angles. Look, if this is about the wedding, Marissa didn't mean anything by the seating thing. It was a mix-up with the planner. I laughed low and hollow. You think this is about a chair? Another pause. Longer. Well, isn't it? Oh, baby, I said. This is about a lifetime. I told him everything. Not all the little humiliations, he wouldn't hear those, but the truth behind them. The nights I stayed up worrying about whether he was eating in college. The time I pawned my own wedding band to pay his dorm deposit. The holidays I spent alone because Marissa's family did a destination thing. And how I had quietly handed over every cent I could spare to fund the wedding he didn't even bother thanking me for. You called me a burden, I said finally. Maybe not out loud, but you did. He tried to speak. I could hear it in the catch of his breath, but I didn't let him. I'm not angry, I continued. I just finally understand. And understanding changes things. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just spoke my truth into the receiver like it was an exhale I'd been holding in for decades. Loretta, he said finally, his voice so small, so boyish it almost broke me. I didn't mean to make you feel like you don't matter. That's the thing, baby, I said. You didn't make me feel that way. You showed me I didn't. I ended the call before he could reply. That night, I opened a fresh notebook, wrote down the names of every single mom I knew from the church, ones who dropped off casseroles when I was sick, ones who worked 3 jobs and still braided their daughter's hair before school. I didn't have much, but I had a plan now. I had something to give on my terms. That blueberry cobbler? I brought it over to Miss Janie next door. She's raising her grandson while her daughter battles addiction. I told her it was too much for me to eat alone. She smiled, her eyes watery. You're a blessing, Loretta. And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. A week after the call, an envelope arrived in the mail. Not a bill, not a catalog. Hand-addressed, no return label. Just my name in Jonathan's handwriting. I set it on the table beside my tea and stared at it for nearly an hour. He hadn't written me a letter since 2nd grade. Something about loving me more than pizza and recess. I still had that one, folded in my jewelry box beside my mother's brooch. I opened this one with slow hands. Ma, it began. Not Mom, not Mother, just Ma. I've been thinking about what you said. About the house. About everything. He went on, paragraphs of explanations that felt more like excuses. He mentioned stress, wedding chaos, Marissa's high expectations, his career, his pressure. The word sorry showed up twice, but never once alone, always followed by if or but. Then came the part that made my breath catch. I guess I just assumed you'd always be there. That everything you did was because you wanted to. That it didn't cost you anything. I laughed. It was a bitter sound, one that didn't feel like me. It cost me everything. My youth, my sleep, my peace of mind, my dreams. He ended the letter with a request, not for money, thank God, but for a conversation. Face to face, he wrote. Maybe we can start again. Start again. I folded the letter, tucked it into the side drawer with the others, the sweet ones, the handmade ones, the lies I used to call love notes. That night I didn't sleep. My body lay still, but my thoughts marched through every room of that house like soldiers. I stood in the kitchen around midnight, bare feet on cold tile, and I whispered, start again. How do you start again when the beginning was built on sacrifice and the middle was paved with silence? Still, I didn't throw the letter away. A few days later, I ran into Miss Clara from the church at the farmer's market. She asked how the wedding had gone. I told her the truth. Not all the details, but enough. She touched my arm gently and said, well, honey, sometimes the only way to get respect is to take your worth off the table. That stuck with me. I went home, poured myself a glass of wine I'd been saving since Christmas, and finally hung a framed picture I'd had in storage for years. It was me, holding baby Jonathan, both of us laughing, before the weight of the world had taken root in my spine. I hung it in the living room, right where guests could see it, right where I could see it every day, because I needed the reminder. I didn't raise a man to be thanked, but I didn't raise one to forget me, either. A week later, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Jonathan. It was Marissa. The screen lit up with her name like a warning. I hesitated, let it ring long enough to wonder if I should even answer. Curiosity won. Loretta, she chirped, that bright, clipped voice she used when she wanted something. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I set my teacup down. What can I do for you, Marissa? Oh, it's just we've been talking about hosting a brunch. You know, post-wedding. A little family get-together to tie everything up with a bow. Jonathan thought it might be nice. I could already feel where it was going. She paused, then rushed on. It's just that with so many moving parts, we're a bit over budget. And you've always been so generous. There it was. Not an invitation. Not a thank you. A request. For more. I smiled into the phone, even though she couldn't see it. That smile. The one you give to people who don't realize the knife they're twisting is already dull from overuse. Marissa, I said gently, the budget isn't my concern anymore. Silence. Then a sharp little laugh. Oh, I thought maybe, well, I just assumed. I know, I said. Everyone does. I hung up before she could backpedal, then turned off my phone and stood in the middle of my living room, just breathing. The air felt different, lighter somehow. The next morning, I drove to the venue where the brunch was supposed to be held. I'd seen the reservation on a list in Jonathan's email a few months ago, back when I was still managing all the wedding details they couldn't be bothered with. It was a charming place, all whitewashed brick and ivy-covered trellises. I knew the manager by name. I walked in, smiled warmly, and said, "Hi, I'm here to cancel the Collins brunch reservation." Oh, the manager blinked. But that was under your son's name, wasn't it? I leaned in a little, still smiling. Yes, but I'm the one who paid the deposit. A quick search. A nod. Yes, ma'am. Would you like to reschedule? No, I said. Cancel it. And please, feel free to rebook the slot. I'm sure someone else will need it. And just like that, it was done. I took the refund, every penny, and wrote a check that afternoon to the local community center. They run a program for teen mothers. I handed it over personally to the director, who looked at me like I just handed her a miracle. That evening, I sat on the porch, wrapped in my shawl, and watched the sun melt into the horizon. The house creaked around me like it was settling into the same peace I was finally starting to feel. That brunch never happened, but a mother finally began to breathe. I knew the story had made the rounds when Miss Daphne from 3 doors down leaned across her porch railing one morning and said, "You all right, Loretta?" Heard there was a little wedding mix-up. She said it like she was discussing a burnt pie, not the unraveling of a lifetime of sacrifice. I smiled, waved off her concern, and said, "Just setting a few things straight, that's all." But the whispers had already started. At church the following Sunday, a few ladies offered tight-lipped smiles and hesitant hugs. One of them, Mrs. Reynolds, who never met a piece of gossip she didn't chase down like a bloodhound, cornered me by the coffee urn. "Heard you canceled the wedding brunch?" "After the seating situation," she said, arching one penciled brow. I took my time stirring sugar into my cup. "Well," I said softly, "when you're not given a seat at the table, sometimes the best thing to do is build your own." That shut her up for once. But word spread anyway. I became the story in the produce aisle, the murmur in the beauty parlor. Some folks called me petty, others brave. Most didn't know what to make of me anymore. Jonathan didn't call for a while after the brunch was canceled. I suspected he was nursing bruises, not just to his ego, but to his image. He cared about perception. Always had. Then one afternoon, he showed up on my porch. Unannounced. I was in the garden, deadheading marigolds, wearing my wide-brimmed hat and the old apron with faded sunflowers on it. He looked out of place. Dress shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled, that fancy watch glinting like a spotlight. "Hey, Ma," he said. "John," I replied, not standing. He shifted from foot to foot. "Can we talk?" I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, and gestured toward the porch swing. He sat. I didn't. He looked around like he was seeing the house for the first time. The porch swing he helped me paint when he was 10. The wind chimes made from old keys we'd strung up during a summer too hot to breathe indoors. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what you said, about how I made you feel." I didn't reply. I just waited. I guess I didn't realize how much I leaned on you, or how much I took for granted. Still, I said nothing. He looked up at me then, his eyes red around the edges. "I'm sorry." There it was. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I nodded once. "All right." He blinked. That's it. That's a start, I said. But don't think an apology means I forget. I remember everything I gave, and now I'm giving myself something in return. He didn't understand. Not really, but he nodded like he wanted to. When he left, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. That night, I sat on the porch until the stars came out. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. I just watched the sky and thought about how peace doesn't always come wrapped in a bow. Sometimes it comes in a porch swing and the sound of your own breath steady in the dark. About a month after the wedding, a letter arrived from Mr. Humphrey's office. Thick envelope, official seal, crisp paper that smelled like permanence. It held the finalized trust documents. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one Jonathan used to scribble spelling words on, and ran my fingers over the embossed name, the Loretta May King Foundation. It sounded too big for me, but it was mine. Everything was now formal, legal. My home would one day help other women the way no one had helped me. Scholarships for single mothers, housing grants, maybe even a little daycare tucked behind a community center. I'd given my life away one sacrifice at a time, and now I was reclaiming it, signature by signature. Later that afternoon, I went to the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, not since before my arthritis started making the stairs feel like a mountain. But something called me there. Dust tickled my nose as I opened box after box. School projects, report cards, baby clothes folded so neatly I nearly wept. And tucked in the very back corner, I found a folder with Jonathan's old college paperwork, financial aid forms, essays, scholarship rejection letters. I flipped through until I found it, a copy of the check I'd written for his first semester. I had written in the memo line, "For everything you'll become." I stared at it for a long time. He had become something, a lawyer, a husband, a man shaped by my sacrifice, but also, at least for a time, someone who forgot who stood behind him, holding up the scaffolding. I slid the folder into a fireproof box with the trust documents. That night, I baked a peach cobbler and brought it to the community center just because. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes and a baby on her hip, nearly cried when I handed it over. "Lord, I haven't had dessert in a month," she said, laughing through her tears. As I walked back to my car, a thought hit me with such clarity it made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk. Jonathan may have forgotten who I was, but I hadn't. And now the world was going to remember me too. Not as a mother erased, but as a woman who rewrote her ending. About 6 weeks after the wedding, on a Thursday evening that smelled like rain and dust, I got a text from Jonathan. "Ma, can we come for dinner? Just us. No fuss. Just time together." I stared at the screen for a long moment. There had been a time I would have run to thaw a roast, pull out the linen napkins, and light candles before I even replied. But that woman, the one who moved mountains just to be noticed, was resting now. Still, something in me softened. A child's voice never quite stops echoing inside a mother. I texted back Sunday, 5 p.m. "If you bring wine, bring one I can pronounce." When they arrived, I just pulled a sweet potato casserole out of the oven. The house smelled like cinnamon and rosemary. Comfort. Home. Jonathan walked in holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers, yellow daisies and blue irises. Not the fancy ones, but cheerful. Marissa followed, quiet, holding a bottle of Merlot like it might explode. They sat at the table while I plated up the food. No speeches, no grand gestures, just a meal. For the first time in a long while, we ate together. Midway through, Jonathan said we were wrong. About so much. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. He apologized again, this time without cushioning or caveats. Said he hadn't known what it meant to carry someone until he started carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. Said he saw now what I had given, what I had paid. "I was raised by a warrior," he said, "and I acted like you were a footnote." Marissa stayed mostly quiet, though she nodded, eyes shining a bit. "I didn't understand," she said finally, "how someone could give so much and ask for so little." I looked at her then, really looked, and what I saw wasn't just the girl who'd banished me to the kitchen at my own son's wedding. It was a woman, young, unsure, maybe even a little ashamed, trying to figure out how to step down from a pedestal she didn't build. When they left, Jonathan hugged me longer than he had in years. Ma, he whispered, thank you for everything and for not slamming the door shut. I didn't say you're welcome. I just held him. Because that's what you do when the door was never about vengeance. It was about boundaries. And now that I had them, I could choose when to open them again. I stood on the porch after they left, barefoot, letting the cool breeze wrap around me like a second skin. The house was still mine. The peace was still mine. And maybe, just maybe, some of the love would be mine again, too. It was a quiet Tuesday when the email came in. Subject line: local woman turns betrayal into hope. At first, I thought it was spam. But then I saw the name, Rachel Patel, a young reporter from the local paper who'd once interviewed me years ago after a church fundraiser. She'd remembered my peach cobbler. Mrs. King, she wrote, I heard about your new foundation and the story behind it. I'd love to do a piece on you. Not just about the trust, but the why. My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't doing this for attention. But then I thought of the mothers at the shelter, the cashier at the food mart who told me she was saving up for night school, the receptionist at the community center who whispered, thank you for seeing us. So I said yes. Rachel came by the house with a notepad, a tape recorder, and wide eyes that sparkled with curiosity. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping sweet tea and listening like what I said mattered. She asked thoughtful questions about the wedding, yes, but also about the years before. The nights I ironed clothes on the floor because I couldn't afford a board. The time I walked 5 miles to work when the bus strike hit. The day I handed over my last $50 for Jonathan's textbooks. What changed? She asked gently. I didn't even have to think. I stopped trying to earn a seat at a table I paid for. She smiled at that. That's going in the headline. The article ran 2 Sundays later. Front page of the lifestyle section. There was a photo of me on the porch, sunlight soft on my shoulders, my peacock brooch catching the light. The headline read, From Burden to Beacon, How Loretta Mae King Turned Rejection into Legacy. The response was immediate. Letters started arriving. Cards, emails from women across the country. Some old, some young, some right in the thick of it, raising kids, holding marriages together with prayer and coffee. One said, I thought I was invisible. Your story helped me remember I'm not. Another said, I've been afraid to stand up for myself. But now I think maybe it's time. A local bookstore offered to host a gathering for women like us. Mothers, caretakers, quiet warriors. We met over muffins and shared stories that had never seen daylight. We cried. We laughed. We clapped for one another. And somewhere between all of it, I realized something. I hadn't just saved my home. I'd reclaimed my voice. It had never been about revenge. It was about remembering who I was before the world told me to hush. Autumn rolled into Decatur like a slow exhale, trees shedding their burden, air turning crisp, sky stretching wide and blue. The light changed too, growing softer, more forgiving. I started taking longer walks in the mornings, wrapped in a wool shawl, the one I used to wear when Jonathan was little, and I'd push him around the neighborhood in his secondhand stroller, humming gospel songs just loud enough to drown out my worry. It had been 3 months since the wedding. 3 months since I sat behind swinging kitchen doors like a ghost at a party I'd paid for. 3 months since I remembered who I was. Then, one Thursday, I found it. Not in my inbox, not through a knock at the door, just a folded piece of lined paper tucked carefully into my mailbox. No envelope, no postage. The handwriting caught me first. Slanted, careful, Jonathan's. I stood there on the porch for a long moment before I unfolded it, my breath visible in the cold. Ma, I read the article. I read it 3 times. Marissa read it too. She cried. I cried. Then we sat in silence, and I realized it was the first time in a long time I'd ever felt shame the way a son should. I don't know how to undo what's been done. I don't expect grace. But I wanted you to know that I see it now, the cost. Your cost. You gave everything. I treated it like air. I assumed you'd always be there, like light from a bulb I never thought to replace. I've been selfish and blind. I'm sorry, Ma. Truly. I love you. I never stopped. I just forgot how to show it. I want to earn your trust back. even if it takes me the rest of my life. Your son. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just pressed the letter to my chest and felt the beat of my heart steady beneath it. Later that night, I tucked it into my Bible, right between Psalms and Proverbs, between pain and wisdom, where it belonged. After that, Jonathan started coming around. Not like before. Slower, gentler. Sometimes just to fix a creaky gate or bring me pecans he'd picked up from the farmer's market. He didn't try too hard. He just showed up. That meant more than anything. Marissa came too. Quiet at first. She brought a store-bought pie one Sunday. It was too sweet and a little underbaked, but she looked so nervous handing it over that I smiled and said, "It's perfect." They were trying, not just to make amends, but to understand. That was new. And me. I was different too. I had boundaries now. When Jonathan asked if I wanted to come stay at their place for Thanksgiving, I said, "Thank you, but no." I didn't make an excuse. Didn't try to soften it. I just said what I meant. Instead, I hosted. Not just them, either. I invited the women from the community center, the single moms, the grandmothers raising grandbabies, the tired, uncelebrated warriors I'd met since the story ran. We filled the house with laughter and foil-covered casseroles and paper plates that bent under the weight of generosity. And in the center of it all sat me. Not invisible. Not erased. Whole. A week later, Jonathan stopped by with a small frame wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen in years, me holding him in the hospital room, sweat on my brow, joy in my eyes. Someone had written on the matting in neat, block letters. She wasn't just there. She made the way. He didn't say anything when I opened it. He didn't need to. That night, after they left, I sat by the window, sipping my tea. The house creaked like an old friend settling in. The porch light glowed warm against the falling dusk. I closed my eyes and said the words aloud. Not for anyone else, just for me. I was never a burden. I was the foundation. And now I'm the architect of the rest of my life.